Hi, hello there. I'm Brian Taylor. Very warm welcome to my latest Herald podcast. So, Christmas already yet? I know it's daft, isn't it? But apparently, we should be preparing a plan for our Christmas gift shopping. Not that you understand that there's any need to panic whatsoever about shortages in the shops. It's just one of the economic messages to emerge this week. Today, there's a report from the Scottish Chambers of Commerce. It's got decidedly mixed messages on the economy. There's some immediate optimism, but there's mid to long term concerns. Now, today we'll look at that, and we'll also look at the Northern Ireland Protocol, the attempts to change it, the attempts to reform it. Will they work? Will they go far enough? My guests today, three MSPs. Delighted to welcome Paul McLennan of the SNP, Maurice Golden from the Conservatives, and Pauline McNeill from Labour. I'll be talking to them very shortly. But first, joined by David Bull from the Herald. David, remind us of those, as I said, mixed messages from those economic forecasts.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Brian, there's a new report from the Scottish Chambers of Commerce released today, which indicated the economy did bounce back pretty strongly over the summer as the more severe restrictions were lifted, which is obviously good news for businesses. Not all sectors have experienced this. Obviously, tourism and some sort of hospitality businesses are still sort of stuttering, but that is good news largely. However, there's huge concerns raised by businesses in all sectors over sort of soaring costs, inflation, and sort of labour pressures. Huge cost increases of sort of raw materials. Obviously, we know about the wholesale gas crisis, which doesn't seem to have been resolved, and hugely inflated shipping costs are also sort of wrecking that business confidence. Yes. Tourism, manufacturing, and construction sectors are all facing labour shortages. Plus, there's the high-profile HGV shortages, which are still ongoing, and in social care, the workforce, there's still sort of huge job vacancies, and these things are being exacerbated by sort of the impacts of Brexit, and it means like we could be heading for quite a dismal looking sort of winter period, which doesn't sound particularly festive at the moment.
No, David, thanks very much. Maurice Golden, thanks very much for joining us. I mean, grounds for optimism in a turnaround from the situation that we faced during the pandemic, but it doesn't sound very upbeat. Look, frankly, in the economy, the real economy, it doesn't feel very upbeat at the moment. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I really welcome the fact that the bounce back in the economy is happening. We saw that from the Chamber of Commerce report. But in the longer term, there's some major structural issues in the economy which need to be addressed. As we've heard from David, rising costs of energy, of raw materials, of shipping and global supply chain, and an expected inflation rate, at least in the short term, in the next few months, of around 4%, and the impact of that on both consumption and indeed wages. I think ultimately that the long-term solution is to move to a circular economy where we have resources circulating around the economy in as high value state for as long as possible. That wouldn't alleviate every single problem, but
explain what you mean. What do you mean by that? And I know you're a fan of that, but explain what you mean by that.
So in terms of material consumption, we would increasingly reuse or repurpose products, which would mean that we wouldn't be so reliant on importing raw materials, for example.
Okay.
So things like everything from mobile phones to TVs to electronic goods. There's more gold in 1 ton of waste electricals that currently goes to scrap than there is of ore in the ground. So there's value there. We just need to do a lot better at recovering it.
Okay. Pauline McNeill, do you feel upbeat? Do you feel concerned? Do you feel fretful? How should we be feeling about the economy, do you think?
So similarly to Maurice, you can see that, in fact, the Fraser of Allender had said that we expect to return to pre-pandemic economic levels this coming April. So that looks good. But the threat of high inflation is what's going to likely derail the economy. And it doesn't take a politician or an expert to see that already food prices are rising. We already know that energy prices are going to rise. It's a real worry, I think, for ordinary families. So this coming Christmas, warnings about, trying to buy early, or some of the things that, the Barbie dolls or the Paw Patrol, like PlayStation 5 might not be available. I think more families probably just concerned about not having a Christmas last year, and this year it also looks perhaps a bit bleak because of maybe short-term issues of supply and so on. But
Yeah,
I think there are longer-term concerns.
but I heard you mentioned Polly, you said there, ordinary families. Are you finding that folk you speak to, they're just worried, they are concerned, they're anxious, they maybe don't target it precisely, but they're not feeling upbeat. But despite some of the upbeat messages in some
Yeah,
of the
I think they're worried because those who were previously furloughed and trying to regain economic sustainability then have to face higher energy prices and higher food prices. And those who've lost employment, they've got the cut universal credit. It's for those families. So I think this is actually quite immediate, to be honest, on many families in the coming months. But in the longer term, I think that there has to be government action. There's got to be some control of energy prices. And whether the idea that Morris talks about circular economy is the answer, we need bigger ideas. We cannot go on like this if we've to try and maintain standards of living for people and not spiral deeper into poverty even in the short to medium term for many families who rely on affordable housing, energy prices, and affordable food prices.
Paul McLennan, what's your take on this? Upbeat, downbeat, gloomy, optimistic? What's your take?
Yeah. I think, Brian. I think at the moment I probably agree with what Pauline and Morris is saying. I think in the short term we've seen statistics out from the ONS which showed employment roughly round about back to pre-pandemic levels, and I think Pauline mentioned about the Fraser-Valander report, again, which mentioned about April. So I think in the short term, obviously coming out of the pandemic, we're coming from, I suppose, from a low point about where the economic growth was. So generally positive at this stage. I think there are issues that are going to face us quite immediately. And Pauline mentioned about the risk of inflation. The local government committee just a few weeks ago, we were speaking to Homes from Scotland, and they were saying some of their costs were up around about 30 to 40%, and not just costs, but actually getting some of the materials to them. So these are issues that I think ultimately will feed through to inflation. And I think that, coupled with the cost of living issues that we have in terms of universal credit cuts, referred about, fuel costs, and so on, it's going to be a tough few months, I think, as we continue to come out of that. And I think that's something that we all across the Parliament need to be aware of and work collectively to try and look at solutions, not just in the next 5-6 months, but beyond that.
Right, you're agreeing on the diagnosis. You're agreeing on the short-term improvement. You're agreeing on the diagnosis of mid to long-term concerns. Let's look at some of the cures. Paul McLennan, let's look at two. First of all, bring in anything you like, but let's look at a couple. Let's look at action by the UK government on benefits, and let's look at the impact of Brexit on the economy. Let's start with benefits, Paul McLennan. Presumably, you believe that the uptake in the increase in the removal of the increase in universal credit has been done too quickly.
Yeah, and I think I think this was agreed across the chamber, apart from obviously Conservatives, and I think the main thing we were talking about is it affects 8,000 families in my area, in my constituency alone. It'll affect everybody's constituency, and I think that is going to have a major impact. We've also had a few energy companies that have also gone bust in the area, in the local area as well in the last few months. And again, that's going to impact, because the immediate feedback we're getting is that their costs are going up. They're trying to get new contracts.
And yet it was always meant to be temporary. And the Prime Minister says what you should be doing is relying upon improving wages in permanent jobs for people in your area and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the Prime Minister's talked about that, and his conference speech, we talked to trying to look around about what he called a high-wage, high-skilled economy. Most people, for example, in universal credit in my area are people who work. So it's impacting them disproportionately. Therese Coffey mentioned around about, they just have to work 2 additional hours. There was additional work carried out in that, and it would take around about 9 hours to do that. And it's not just a case of then people going out and trying to find these 9 hours work. It's not as simple as that, So welfare benefits are there, obviously to protect the most vulnerable. But there are going to be incentives for them to go out and work as well, and try to get to high skilled and high, high wage economy. Nobody doubts that. That's not going to happen overnight. That's not going to happen overnight. And that's something that I think that it needs to be looked at. Of course, we want to look at productivity. Productivity is an issue in Scotland, and it has been in the UK compared with the rest of Europe. Yeah. That's something all of us, all politicians in the UK need to be aware of. That we need to increase productivity, and I think that's.
Thanks. I'll raise that in a moment.
That's will have an immediate impact.
No, I'll raise productivity in a moment. That is a big point, because you cannot have. If companies are to pay higher wages, they have to see improved productivity. Otherwise, their profit margins will decline and their own viability, frankly, will go. But let's stick with benefits for a moment and the support given to families, furlough benefits. Pauline McNeill, what's your take on that?
So there's no doubt in my mind that the extra £20 was withdrawn far too quickly, if it should have been withdrawn at all. It must be understood that families who rely on universal credit, as Paul says, many are working, but many had good jobs before the pandemic. And those jobs, just because of fate, were taken away from them. And it's because of the time it's going to take for the economy to recover. So I don't think that those families, individuals, should be penalised. They're people who are prepared to work, lost their job through no fault of their own. Now, if we hadn't had a hike in energy prices or fuel prices or food prices, then it'd be more justifiable. But I think the government should have, although the government did say from the beginning it was temporary, I think they should have reassessed it in the light of known factors that at least in the short to medium term, they should have continued.
The UK government, the Treasury would say they did extend it, but they always made clear that it was a temporary matter, and they made clear the economy cannot rely upon that level of subvention.
Well, unfortunately, people do, of course, when they've been but that aside, put that to one side. Where we are now in Britain is right. There's nothing that is coming down in price pretty much that people need to live their lives. Energy is going up. We don't even know by how much. Fuel prices, if you run a car, public transport prices are going up, not coming down. So I think there could have been a reassessment, at least in the short to medium term, till we see where inflation is going to go. Would have been the right thing to do.
Okay, but Maurice Golden, what do you make of that? On that question of benefits, I says we'll come to productivity, we'll come to Brexit. On that question of benefits and the support from the UK government.
Well, I think the support from the UK government over the pandemic to Scotland's £14.5 billion, which is a colossal sum. And it's also worth noting that just last year, the UK government borrowed £289 billion as well. So there's an issue with how much the UK government is able and willing to borrow, because all that debt needs to be serviced. But as the other commentators have said, the universal credit uplift was a temporary measure. Yes. But I think there's, given the energy crisis, given the increase in costs, I would urge the UK government to look at enhancing their current schemes to support those on low incomes with energy costs. For example, the winter fuel payments, and I think a measure of increasing those would help to alleviate those that are currently suffering from fuel poverty.
Yeah, but Maurice, that wouldn't account for families who've had that extra £20 and all those rising costs. They don't qualify. That's the problem. It's not.
Well, that's why we need to. Well, that's why, Pauline. That's why I'm urging the UK government to enhance those current schemes, right, and with a very specific targeted measure to help those that might be able to receive warm home discount scheme, for example. But it's also worth knowing, Brian, that the risk of fuel poverty has been around for a very long time. The SNP pledged to eradicate fuel poverty by 2016 and failed to do so.
Yeah, okay. But let Paul McLennan, what's your take on that? That there could be some support for I mean, folk are really worried about these energy prices because, as Pauline McNeill says, they don't know where they're going to be going to. They don't know what the bills are going to be. Paul?
Yeah, I would agree. Enough. I mentioned that in my first contribution was around about that. It's not just cuts to universal credits, it's also fuel. We've already got constituents coming back and saying that around about there, facing £20-30 a month extra, but already, and that's likely to increase. And I think one thing we've got to remember is energy first and foremost is a reserve matter. We can't get around about the tariffs. I think there's things that obviously we can do. The Scottish Child Payment, for example, has been talked around about. I know that's and we actually had to, and I suppose it's the irony and the cheek of the Tories. You know, on one hand, we had a debate in the Parliament the other week talking around about trying to double the Scottish child payment, while they sit in their hands and don't say a word around about universal credit cuts. You know, so I mean, let's try and be fair and you know, consistent on the matter. You know, I think the Scottish Government is trying to do that. It's also been trying to look at the cost, for example, and this comes back to maybe, you know, some of the poorer families in other areas, around about the cost of schooling and so on, you know, whether it's through free school dinners or uniforms and so on. So there's been various programmes looked at. But the main thing to come out for me, Brian, is that, of course, energy is reserved. It's now up to the UK Government to come forward with proposals. And I know there seems to be a debate, and this seems to be with the Energy Minister in the UK talking around about, do we support companies? Do we support, you know, in this regard as well? Or, do you know, or so should there be more of I suppose, an emphasis on low-income families right throughout the UK? And I think, I'm not sure where the UK Government wants to go on this yet, and I think there's a bit of a battle going on between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson on this one, around about where are the priority areas. Of course we need to support business, of course, but the more important thing is making sure the most vulnerable in our societies are protected this winter. That's the most important thing for me.
Let's bring in the element of Brexit. David Ball, David, the politicians are disputing, it's not entirely down party lines, but there is a dispute as to the impact that Brexit is having upon the economy. I think the Chancellor said it will sow benefits in the medium to long term. Is there any way of assessing where we are on the impact it's having right now on, say, you know, exports and trade?
Well, yeah, exports and trade are sort of down, and it's very difficult to analyse it in a sort of a COVID world, as it were. We're not in normal times, so it's very difficult to compare sort of pre-Brexit and where we are now. But obviously, there is definitely having an impact if you look at the jobs market, the labour market. Bearing in mind, Boris Johnson had to sort of renege on that, his policy for overseas workers to be able to come. He obviously recognised there is an issue there, and that is a barrier to that. So there are definitely impacts, but it's very hard to tell the size of it and if that will sort of iron out as we come out of the pandemic and the inflation problems and the economy does get back to a more stable sort of footing.
Yeah, because we are in a completely bizarre set of circumstances with this hideous plague affecting everyone. Pauline McNeill, what's your take? Has Brexit made things worse, or could it make things better, as appears to be the argument from the Chancellor?
Economically, I believe it has made things worse overall. I mean, you can see there's arguments been made that we got the vaccine quicker because we weren't tied to European Union. But I mean, you talk to people who've tried to buy basic electrical goods imported from Germany, and they'll tell you that hundreds and hundreds of pounds in tax that they didn't pay before. Labour market shortages. I mean, as you say, it's hard to say. We face a really complex set of circumstances, but it's hard to kind of see through what exactly is causing the supply problems. So some of it will be pandemic related, but some of it is Brexit related. There's no doubt in my mind that I know we'll get to the question of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but
yes, indeed.
There's no doubt there's a dimension to this that was not thought of through that's impacting on the British and the Scottish economy. And that is the trade barriers that now exist for Britain, adding to inflation. So it's really not good. Of course, we couldn't, when people voted, we couldn't have foreseen that there would have been a pandemic. But I believe if we didn't have Brexit, I do think overall economically we'd have been in a better position to recover from the disaster.
Paul, what's your take?
Yeah, Brian, it would be silly to say that COVID hasn't had an impact, but I think if you look at the statistics and a deep dive into statistics, and for example, the first 7 months, Eurostat provided statistics saying that the exports from the UK to the EU fell by 17.1%, 16 billion pounds. At the same time, and remember, this is a COVID world, at the same time, the EU increased its exports by 6.2% to the UK, 9 billion pounds. So we've seen the trade surplus that the EU has with the UK an increase of that time of 45% just this year alone. And if we're talking around about organisation and other exports to the EU, Russia was up 41%, Norway up 36%, India 33%, Turkey 26%, South Korea 23%, China up 6%, Japan 12%, and the US 5%. So these countries have all been affected by COVID as well. A lot of countries have said Brexit has made a major impact, and the stats back that up. And I said it would be silly enough to say that COVID hasn't had an impact. Of course it has, but the stats just announced this year in the 7 months are backed up. And, you know, one of the key things, and I know Morris won't like this, because as soon as you mention Scotland's Food and Drink and James Withers, all we ever get from the Tory benches is that, you know, he's an SNP member. Utter nonsense, and it's trying to deflect from the issue. Scotland's Food and Drink, and we have in East Lothian the first sector-based bid, Business Improvement District, and it's food and drink. I've had various chats with them. They are struggling because they can't get the exports out. And Morris can shake his head. I'm speaking to the constituents in my area around about that, and it's making a major impact on one of the most important business areas in East Lothian, and that's food and drink. So the stats don't lie. COVID's made a difference, but the stats don't lie.
Morris, you're accused of shaking your head. How do you plead?
I was actually giggling at the Paul McClellan reading off the script of pre-printed statements.
He was reading off a list. There's nothing wrong with that. He must have got it right. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. You need to get your economic statistics right. But you know, in terms of your original question, Brian.
Carry on,
in
Morris.
terms of your
how good Brexit is for Britain.
question, Brian. I mean,
Brexit,
I think in the short term, it was always recognised that there'd be difficulties, but I think in the long term, we can make Brexit a success. I think that the fact that we've seen.
Brian, can I make a point there? Can Morris actually specify what short term and longer term is? Because we were told at the start. That there's teeth problems. Are these teething problems for the next 2-3 years or the next 5 years?
I hate to join in this tirade of interrupting, but you said it was always recognised there were going to be problems in the. I don't remember that. I don't remember that being said by the Leave team in 2016. I just don't remember that. Yeah. What was it? The easiest deal ever. It was going to be a scoosh. It was on the side of the lorry, 350 million. Extra per week that could go to the NHS. I don't remember any statement whatsoever to the effect of saying it was always going to be tough in the short term. I just don't recall that.
Well, that's my position, and that's why I voted ultimately to remain. And I always recognised there'd be short-term issues with, changing entire trade relationships. And it's worth noting that the SNP's lead economic advisor says that independence would be Brexit times 10. So, it's ludicrous to bemoan Brexit and then support Scottish independence. The two just do not correlate.
Do you believe, Morris, that Brexit is causing problems to the economy right now in Scotland and the UK?
It's undoubtedly part of a myriad of issues, not least COVID, that it is causing difficulties and changes. But we've seen 70 trade deals agreed by the UK government. And I think as we see more of those, then there'll be more opportunities. And we all need to ensure that Scotland's at the heart of global Britain.
Bolling McNeill, there are trade deals coming. It's going to get better.
And I never believed it then, and I certainly don't believe it now. It's down to making it up as they go along, to be honest. I mean, we are where we are. I'm a Remainer. There is no point in justifying a decision which quite clearly in front of our very eyes it is clearly causing economic damage. And there's other things to discuss. UK Steel said this week they think that the government have created a hostile environment, and the government are going to have to do a lot better than this to make up for the failures of a Brexit strategy that hasn't given us any alternatives, any real alternatives, where we face very severe labour shortages. I made umpteen speeches in the last Parliament, I'm sure Morris did as well, about the need, and I think that was acknowledged by Morris, that we need the government to recognise if we are going to even try and not make a success of it, but try and make it work, then Scotland has to have a say in the type of skills that we need in order to not face skill shortages. So there needs to be a lot more listening from the UK government if they actually are serious about making the best of it.
Paul McClellan will do independence another week, of course, but the issue was raised that Scottish independence would be 10 times worse than Brexit. What's your response to that?
No, you would expect me not to agree with that, and I think one key thing I think, Brian, one thing just to compare and contrast. We talk about one of the key things I think we've had from my constituents about food and drink is not just the short-term issues. It's the longer-term loss of contract. As soon as these businesses can export. The businesses overseas will go and try and find other markets, and they've been doing that. So there's a longer term issue about that. There was a debate just last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago in the Parliament, talking around about Scotland's place in the world. And one of the things that came up was around about the Scottish Government opening up new hubs in Copenhagen and in Warsaw to do that very thing, to look at additional markets and building these markets there at the cost of £8 million. £8 million, just £8 million. And we had Tory MSP after MSP after MSP criticising that. Now, one of the key things I think is really important, that's been a success story in Scotland, is the foreign direct investment that we've had over a number of years. Scotland has outperformed the UK. It's outperformed most of the other parts in the UK, out with London. So, the more we can invest in hubs such as Warsaw and Copenhagen and building the 8 that we have, the more opportunities we have to re-establish these markets. And yet, we had, as I said, Tory MSP after Tory MSP criticising that investment of £8 million, just £8 million.
I'm going to move off the economy shortly. Thanks. I'm going to move off the economy shortly and move to Northern Ireland and ask David Ball to bring us into that. But before we do that, maybe a word from each of you. Are you upbeat about let's say the midterm, because maybe not the short term, and the midterm prospects for the economy? Paul, then Pauline, then Maurice. Paul first.
I would say cautiously optimistic at this stage. Right.
Pauline McNeill.
At this stage, short to medium term, unless there's any kind of major intervention in the energy supply market, caps on prices or caps on food prices, I have to say I am deeply concerned for ordinary people right now, and I hope I'm wrong.
And people will be thrust into poverty still further, according to what you're saying.
I think there will be more hardship, but there are interventions. I mean, there are radical interventions that could change that. I hope that some of these radical ideas, we're really starting to think about them now to prevent this from happening.
Okay. Maurice Golden, upbeat, optimistic, pessimistic, middling. What do you reckon?
I think I'm upbeat with a caveat, and only if Scotland produces an industrial strategy which is linked to major infrastructure projects that ensure that we can get lots of the high-skilled jobs that we've been talking about into Scotland.
Okay. Thanks for that. Let's move to it's an economic issue as well. Of course, it's an economic issue, but it's also very much a political issue, as indeed is pretty well everything. But David Ball, the Northern Ireland Protocol, we've got moves today from the European Commission going to see Northern Ireland ministers. It seems you have suggestions by the UK government that we tear it up and start again with the protocol designed to ease trade on the island of Ireland, but then you have suggestions from the Commission that they can just sort individuals. Take us through that, if you would. Where are we on the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, that's right. I mean, the protocol, which is basically the agreement which was agreed between the UK and the EU over the checks to goods sort of entering Northern Ireland from Britain. It's back at the start of another Brexit row. I mean, despite agreeing to the measures, the UK government has decided it's not happy with pressing ahead with that anymore. I mean, it has been under pressure from mostly unionists in sort of Northern Ireland to rip that deal up, as it essentially puts a customs border down the Irish Sea, which obviously undermines the sort of strength of the union. The EU has proposed sort of hugely scaled back plans which would cut a lot of the red tape, particularly over food products. They wouldn't need these sort of timely and costly physical checks anymore. There's also sort of easing pressure on medicines being able to transfer. But it's potentially got huge trade implications for Scotland and the rest of the UK if there is a trade war, which has been talked about, if there isn't an agreement sort. And it potentially has huge reputational damage for the UK government. We're just hoping to secure these new trade deals across the world. I mean, the Irish government's deputy leader, Leo Varadkar, yesterday warned other governments not to agree any deal with the UK government until they're confident that they will keep their word, essentially. So it has got huge implications.
Okay, and the one element, David, as well, is that the European Commission are offering on individual things, like cold meat medicines, as you said, but they're saying they absolutely will not allow the removal of the European Court of Justice as the arbiter, and that's something that the UK government say is a red line for them. Yeah,
exactly, and it goes back to the Brexit deal that was done originally, and is there more of a political change towards a sort of an ideological position on that hard Brexit that a lot in the Conservative Party wanted? They wanted to get rid of all the ties with the EU. And yeah, I mean, the EU seems to have come on board with easing some of this, but that is something they will not budge on, it looks like.
Thanks very much, Maurice Golden. You're getting a bit of a kicking this week. It's very unfair. You're not. It's not your blame. It's not your fault. But hey, you're a Conservative. Welcome to politics. You must be. You're Scottish Conservative. You must be used to getting a kicking or whatever. Look,
and growing up in Dundee as well.
And exactly. And Dundee. For goodness sake, you've known pain. For goodness sake, you've known pain. You've also known glory and joy in 1983 and all of that. But Maurice, seriously, is the UK government trying to? David Ball there talked about reputational damage. Are they trying to tear up something that they actually signed and agreed, or are they trying to just remedy it in what they believe is the UK interest?
Well, I think there's two aspects to this, which I would like to see. Firstly, we need to protect the Good Friday Agreement, and secondly, we need the people of Northern Ireland to have broadly the same access to consumables that the rest of the United Kingdom has, and that includes businesses being treated on parity. Now, I welcome that the EU have moved towards that, but I think the UK government position is they want to go further, and I think if we could go further, I think that would be a benefit to all.
Do you think that the UK? I mean, there's some suggestions, not least from Dominic Cummings and others, that the Prime Minister never really meant it. He just signed up to this to get a deal, any deal done, and was proposing to tear it up or ignore it in the long term, medium to long term. Do you give any credence to that accusation?
Well, I wouldn't give much credence to Dominic Cummings, but
that's another matter. Yeah.
In terms of this negotiation, I think it has to be done. I was very sceptical about the original Northern Ireland Protocol as it's operating currently at the time. But obviously, it's a decision for Westminster, not for the Scottish Parliament. And I think it genuinely needs to be looked at. But like David was saying earlier, we need to ensure that we maintain Britain's international reputation.
Pauline McNeill, you're looking pretty sceptical throughout those comments.
Well, I'm no fan of Dominic Cummings, but I mean, the UK government were warned about the consequences of what is the third or fourth arrangement we eventually signed up to put a border down the Irish Sea. Huge political consequences, some of the economic ones for the Irish people and the people of Northern Ireland. So I wholeheartedly agree with Maurice Golden. We have to rescue this disastrous political situation. I mean, £850 million being lost by businesses in Northern Ireland already. This should never have been allowed to happen. So I will attend the British Parliamentary Association this coming weekend. We'll hear from the Taoiseach, and we'll hear from a number of political Irish leaders. And this will be the sole topic of conversation from Sunday to Monday.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, what's your feeling as to what the mood will be? Pretty somber, I would guess, at that gathering.
Well, the mood will be, I think, that the British Irish Parliament is probably is a forum that is not much talked about, probably pretty much needed, because it's the only forum which brings all the Irish and British parties, Scottish parties together, and so the Taoiseach will be speaking, Keir Starmer will be speaking. So I think it'll be quite an interesting platform. There's no doubt that the political ramifications probably are top of the agenda, followed very closely by the economic damage and serious concern. I mean, yesterday you've seen we got unionist parties marching in the street because they feel completely let down by their own alliances. It's probably never been so serious. And meanwhile, prior to that, I've been a member of this assembly for a very long time, where we didn't have Stormont meeting for so long, and Sinn Féin, for example, were more interested in a united Ireland, and they see that. So it is so complicated, but so potentially, if you're someone who believes in the United Kingdom, and not everyone does, It is playing with fire. This protocol arrangement is absolutely playing with fire. So
I'll bring in Paul in a second, but Pauline, just a final thought. Do you think? I mean, is this was the Northern Ireland Protocol a genuine attempt? A good-hearted attempt to try and resolve a dilemma that is created by Brexit, or was it always misplaced in your view?
It was always almost a conundrum that was really, because we think the first arrangement, remember, it's the Northern Ireland would have benefited from being part of the EU arrangements, where Scotland would not. Then the second arrangement basically put a border around the whole of Britain and the whole of Ireland. But then that was unsatisfactory. That did not meet the terms of Brexit. I mean, the Republic, being a member of the EU, attached to the landmass of Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, is almost impossible really to see a solution other than, as someone from the DUP actually suggested, that the answer was for the Republic to leave the EU. I mean, this is the mental arguments, absolutely crazy arguments that had been going on for the last few years. We have to sort it in the interests of the UK, the interests of the people of Northern Ireland, and in the interests of people of the Republic. This is an economically and politically damaging, and like Maurice said at the very beginning, is really seriously undermining the Good Friday Agreement. It's that serious.
Pauline, thanks. Paul McLennan, what's your take on this?
I think the points that Maurice and Pauline made, the most important thing this is about is preserving the Good Friday Agreement, and we had the unique position. Unionist politics in Northern Ireland is it's famously split. And you've seen the four main unionist parties now come together, and at some stage they're talking about possibly withdrawing from Stormont. And that's going to create real issues, and I think create issues about the Good Friday Agreement, and we've heard that concerns from the EU and obviously President Biden also. I think Pauline also mentioned the point around about protecting the economic interests of both Northern Ireland and the Republic, and ultimately out with that within the EU. So these are the most important things. But I think one of the ironies again coming from this is, when this was agreed, it was Lord Frost that came out and lauded the deal, the protocol. This is the same Lord Frost now that's coming out and criticising the protocol that was signed. And the key thing I think for me is that Boris Johnson isn't seen as a Prime Minister who's got a great grasp of detail in any political issue. And I think that was just to get this over the line, and move on as soon as possible. Now we're beginning to see the issues, and it's part of the unravelling of Brexit. The protocol, as part of this, it was promises they know they couldn't be met. But the real fear I have, as I said, is a Good Friday Agreement and the impact it have on it. Nobody wants to go back to what we had before. Nobody.
Paul, I'll raise it before Maurice does, but would there be a comparable difficulty and a comparable challenge if Scotland were to be independent and we had to have a Scotland protocol? And because if Scotland was seeking to rejoin the EU, would there not be a comparable problem with the border with England?
I think if there's a border of England, obviously we need to be discussing now, obviously whether Scotland decided to go back into the EU, and obviously the SNP part of the policy is to do that. In terms of the protocol, in terms of the Good Friday Agreement, I think that would be one major interest. Of course, I'm not going to come in here and be naive. There certainly would be discussions, obviously, with the UK government, but obviously, it's in both Scotland's interests and in the EU interest, and in the rest of the UK interest to make sure that there's favourable trading status that's put there. But we don't have the issues around the Good Friday Agreement, because a lot of the protocol discussions, as you remember, was around about protecting the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement. So, it's in some ways it's comparable, Brian, and others certainly not.
Maurice, I was cheeky enough to say I was speaking for you. I'll give you the chance to do it for real now. Please carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the prospect of Scottish independence and the difficulties that could cause, really does put a shiver down my spine, and it should do for everyone in Scotland. But in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, I would encourage the UK government to act in good faith and the EU to do likewise. And let's work together to ensure a better outcome for the people in Northern Ireland, and indeed where affected, the Republic and the rest of the UK.
Do you think the UK government was perhaps not acting fully in good faith in the past? Were they perhaps so desperate to get a trade deal with the European Union that they signed up, or they encouraged signing up to the Northern Ireland Protocol just simply to get it over the line?
I don't know, Brian. I wasn't part of the discussions, but as I said earlier, at the time, I was deeply sceptical about the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I think if they did make a mistake, which I thought they did at the time, then it's their duty as a UK government to try and rectify that. And I think that's what we're seeing now, to be honest.
David Ball, where are we going next on this? There's talks today between the European Commission and ministers in Northern Ireland. Presumably this needs to bring in the UK and the Republic as well, and indeed the British Irish Parliamentary Association.
Brian, sorry, can I come back just on a point?
Yes, please, Paul, please.
And just on the, obviously said around about prospect of an independent Scotland, there's a couple of examples in the last number of years, for example, about countries splitting. And I mentioned this in a speech just the other week. We looked at, for example, Estonia looking about getting its independence. Its economy in 1991 increased fivefold. And something even more closer to home and probably very comparable is obviously the velvet divorce from the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Slovakia has seen its economy grow 60% in the first 10 years after independence. So there's examples of countries who have full economic levers that Scotland would have that they don't have at the moment about growing their economy. So if we're talking about that, I'm not naive to say there wouldn't be issues, but in terms of potential that Scotland has, Norway and Denmark have GDPs 30 to 40% higher than Scotland because they have the full economic powers. So I look forward to that debate, around about the economic debate, around about this and the opportunities that an independent Scotland would have.
I think we should be focusing on COVID recovery rather than another.
No,
I talk to many people who support.
He said he was
not think this is the time to be debating.
Yeah, he said he was only making an interim point. We've only got a few minutes left, but a reasonable point and a reasonable argument, and all that sort of stuff. Well made, well put. David Ball, let's stick with Northern Ireland Protocol. Where's this going next? We have talks with Northern Ireland ministers. Where do you see the settlement emerging, if indeed it does?
Well, it's all going to come down to those red lines. Both sides have them clearly, and we've been here before, and we have got to resolution. But it's whether that trust has gone a little bit, and whether the EU does take what the UK government is proposing. Will it stick to it again? Also, it depends how much Boris Johnson wants to rock the boat with the international community. In just 2 or 3 weeks' time, he's going to need that cooperation when he hosts COP26. He's going to need the international community on his side, not just in the EU, but Joe Biden obviously has a big interest in the Northern Irish Protocol. And it's how much he's going to want to upset and go into these crucial talks with an international Rammy on his hands.
One or two have said to me, though, that it could be politically advantageous to the Prime Minister within the Conservative Party if he's seen to be standing tough against Europe.
Yeah, I mean, that's always seems to be the problem with Brexit, isn't it? It's trying to keep so many different parts of the Conservative Party and in other countries happy. And where Boris Johnson's priorities lie, really. If he's on a footing for another general election coming up in a couple of years' time, we don't really know when, he's going to be getting pressure from his activists if he's not following through on what a lot of the Leave campaign were expecting.
Okay, Paul, but we're almost out of time. But final thoughts, perhaps Pauline, then Morris, then Paul McLennan. Where's I know we want a solution, but where is a solution to be found, Pauline McNeill? Do you believe?
I think it's difficult to see where a solution can be found, but absolutely must be found. I think the principle I think Morris said it earlier, it has to be that no part of the UK is disadvantaged. And I would say not just Northern Ireland or Scotland too. The protocol should not put any one part of the UK in a disadvantage nor an advantage. Because that would also be equally disastrous for Scotland. So I don't think that's an easy solution to find, but there must be. Boris Johnson, and it's been said by many, if he can position himself in a way that he thinks is beneficial, but if he's not careful, he will be the reason why people start losing faith, those who do support the idea of the union. So I think there is a very delicate balance to be struck. There must be a solution.
Almost out of time. Morris Golden and then Paul McLennan, final thoughts on where you see this going. Morris first.
I mean, I'm heartened that there's been movement already around medicines and specific items. So that's a trajectory we want to see. I hope that in a professional manner, with regards to our international reputation, we can expand that out for all consumers and businesses.
So maybe the PM just banks that, and parks the wider ideological debate for another time. Perhaps because, as David says, he needs some international goodwill.
Definitely.
Okay. Paul McLennan, very briefly, what's your take on where this is heading?
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be an easy solution, and agreeing with what Morris is saying again, I think there'll be some movement around about the edges. I think that'll move it together. We have to get a solution. We have to protect the Good Friday Agreement and make sure that the economies in both the north and south of Ireland are protected as best as possible. It's not going to be easy.
Thanks to all. It's the Irish question after all. It isn't easy. It goes back to Gladstone and way beyond that, and it's never been an easy one. Morris, Pauline, thank you very much. David Ball, Herald colleague, thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks to you for watching, listening, or whatever one does to a podcast. From me, Brian Taylor. Toodaloo.